Welcome in today's episode of
Cold Case Closers.
A single mother walks barefoot across the warm sand. Her toddler, wrapped in a towel still dripping with seawater, giggles in her arms. It's a perfect afternoon until it isn't. A man appears. He doesn't touch either of them. He doesn't yell. He simply asks a question, quiet, almost casual. That brief moment is enough. A nearby off-duty corrections officer notices something others wouldn't. The man's ankle monitor. His face is familiar. The officer calls it in. And just like that, it happens again. This isn't just a breach of parole. This is the return of a boy who, decades earlier, crept into a sleeping house and pulled a child from her bed. What followed was something so chilling, so deliberate, that the community still hasn't recovered. The night Courtney disappeared. It was the height of the Australian summer in January 2001. In Port Clare, a quiet suburb on New South Wales's central coast, the night hummed with the sound of insects and the occasional rustling of trees. Inside the Morley Clark household, the air conditioning softly buzzed. The kids were fast asleep. At 1 a.m., 3-year-old Courtney Morley Clark was checked on by her parents. She was still in her bed, still safe. But when her mother came back at 7 a.m., Courtney was gone. Panic erupted. The parents called the police. Her older brothers, Nathan and Justin, ran door to door searching for her. The community mobilized within minutes. Neighbors opened garages, climbed onto rooftops, and tore through the nearby bushland. But it was too late. At 10:47 a.m., Courtney's tiny body was found in a vacant lot, barely dressed, lying in the long grass. Near her lay a kitchen implement, sharp and stained. She had been stabbed once in the heart. Shock consumed the neighborhood. And within hours, police had a suspect, a boy who lived just 300 meters up the street. The boy's name was, and still is, protected by a court order. He is known only as SLD. SLD had arrived on Northwind Avenue at the age of 4. He was adopted by a respectable, well-liked couple who lived at the top of the hill. They hosted Christmas parties. They smiled at neighbors. They were trusted. But their adopted son had secrets. From early on, kids on the street avoided him. Some said he gave them chills. He'd follow younger kids around, stare too long, or sit alone for hours without speaking. He attended a special school, and though he didn't cause outright chaos, he made people uneasy. No one, especially not the Morley Clarks, imagined what he'd become capable of. On the night Courtney disappeared, SLD slipped out of his home. He was 13 years old. He told police he had simply gone for a walk. But soon, his story changed. Eventually, he brought officers to the vacant lot and said it plainly. "I stabbed her in the heart." He had entered the Morley Clark home through a screen door. He walked into Courtney's room, picked her up, and carried her across the street. She never woke up. He stabbed her once with a kitchen tool and left her body in the grass. Police couldn't believe it. Was he lying? Protecting someone else? But the evidence matched. He knew things no one else could. His reason? Revenge. But not against Courtney. SLD claimed that her older brother had bullied him. But instead of confronting him, he targeted Courtney. Because, in his words, it would hurt more. That single chilling logic was enough to confirm it. This wasn't a confused act of rage. It was planned and cold. Despite being only 13, barely over the age of criminal responsibility, SLD was charged with murder and kidnapping. In court, his defense pushed for psychiatric evaluation, but the evidence was too strong, the motive too calculated. The judge called it an exceedingly disturbing killing, describing it as cruel, calculated, and unjustifiable. In August 2002, SLD was sentenced to 20 years in custody. He was 14 years old. Prison did not rehabilitate SLD. It seemed to refine him. Inside, he quickly gained a reputation for violence. At 16, he attacked a nurse. At 17, he stabbed a juvenile worker with a pen. By 24, he'd lunged at a corrections officer with such force that the man needed 22 stitches. He fashioned weapons from razors and metal. He sent threatening letters under the name Thorn. He was manipulative, unpredictable, and showed no remorse. For a time, other inmates protected him, seeing him as a kid caught in a terrible situation. But as years passed and new attacks surfaced, even they backed away. His psychological evaluations were damning. Doctors described him as institutionalized, angry, emotionally stunted, and obsessed with revenge. In 2021, after 20 years in prison, SLD was released. The public had forgotten him. The media didn't publish his name or image. Most didn't know he was out, but those monitoring him did. He was placed under one of the strictest supervision orders in Australian legal history. He wore an ankle monitor. He had no access to encrypted apps. He couldn't approach children. And yet, in less than 100 days, he breached every boundary. SLD approached nearly 200 women, some days, multiple in succession. Often, he asked about their children. The final straw came on a beach. He approached a mother dressing her toddler by a shower. A corrections officer, off duty but alert, spotted him and called it in. SLD was arrested again. He was found guilty of breaching his conditions and sentenced to 13 more months. By the time SLD's new sentence ended in 2024, officials knew they had a problem. He had spent 24 years in prison, but he was still dangerous. The New South Wales government applied for a continued detention order, hoping to keep him behind bars permanently. It's an extreme measure, reserved for only the worst offenders. Psychiatrists warned that SLD posed a serious risk of violent reoffending. One doctor said he spoke of revenge daily, often targeting the officer who reported him. In his cell, they found notes with that officer's full name. Still, the court ruled against it. The judge agreed he was a danger, but said the legal threshold for indefinite detention hadn't been met. So in early 2025, SLD walked free once again, this time under a 5-year extended supervision order. Courtney's story had long since faded from public view. But now, with SLD back on the streets, many families in Port Clare were reawakened to the horror. Some remembered the crime. Others had never heard of it. But now, they were told that a man who had abducted and killed a child, but the fear was real. What happens when that surveillance slips? What happens when staff grow tired or cut corners? What happens when the system, again, lets go? By now, SLD is 38 years old. He's never held a job, never had a relationship, never even owned a phone without restrictions. He lives in a halfway house. He wears a GPS bracelet. He's banned from playgrounds and schools. But how long can that last? Courtney was only 3 years old when her life was taken. Her family was shattered. Her brothers, boys who had just started school, were forced to grow up knowing that a monster had lived just down the road. And now, that monster walks free. The story of Courtney Morley Clark is one of justice delayed, of safety denied, and of a system torn between rules and reality. We don't know SLD's name, we don't know his face, but we know what he did. And we know that the system, however strict, can sometimes fail. But the bigger question looms: what happens when the monster wakes again? This was one of the darkest stories I've ever covered. If you made it through, thank you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. And if you're still with me, until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and stay aware. Because you never know who's walking beside you.